He killed his friend with his bare hands. Not with magic. Not with the runes that covered every inch of his skin like a map of everything he had ever paid to learn. With his own hands, his own arms, the cord of a robe, and the specific sicking achlai, decision that a man makes when he has already decided that the world matters more than the Brexenbub, people he loves inside it. When it was done, he took what he had come for. He wrapped it in a strip of cloth torn from the laba, dead man's robe. He put it in his pack, and he limped out into the snow. He did not let himself look at the village on his way out. His name was Ryze. He had been making choices like this for longer than most civilizations had. Nox study existed. He had not found a way to make them easier. He had stopped trying. New here? Subscribe. Every week, a League of Legends story told the way it deserves to be heard. To understand Ryze, you have to understand what a world rune is, not in technical terms, not the academic description of a fragment of primordial energy left over from the creation of everything, though that is what they are. You have to understand what a Sakhani, world rune, does to the people who hold one, what it costs a village to possess one. Biabamradas aracha, macha abesetis livli hachbus, macha tefas lifas. The world if the wrong hands reach it first. Runeterra was built on these things. Or rather, Runeterra was built alongside them, around them, in the spaces they left when the world was young enough that power existed without consequence. Then the world aged. Civilizations rose. And the runes, fragments of the same force that had made everything, became the most dangerous objects in existence. Not because of what they were, because of what they did to human ambition. When human ambition encountered them, they amplified, they accelerated. They took whatever was already inside a person, the greed, the vision, the grief, the hunger, and fed it until it overwhelmed everything else. They did not corrupt. They revealed. And what was revealed, when the amplification was complete, was Minhat. Almost never something the world could survive. Ryze knew this. He knew it because he had studied the runes longer than almost anyone alive. He knew it because he had watched what they did. He knew it because of Zerath, because of the rune wars, because of every city that existed now only as a name in a history that the living had mostly stopped reading. He carried the knowledge of catastrophe in the same body. He carried the runes he had already recovered, tattooed into his skin like a record, like a warning, like a form of penance for being the kind of person who needed reminding. He had made a decision, somewhere in the long years of searching and recovering and losing people. Someone had to do this. Someone had to find them before the ones who would use them, I did. Someone had to be willing to make the choices that the work required, even when the Shelley choices were the kind that ended friendships, that ended lives. He had decided he would be that someone. Hoy. He had not known when he made that decision how many times it would ask him to pay in the Shelley specific currency of people he loved. Here is what the histories of Runeterra consistently underestimate: the cost of doing necessary things. The wars get recorded. The catastrophes get names. The decisions that prevented even larger catastrophes are usually made by one person in a cold room, and no one writes them down at all. Freljord received him the way Freljord received everything, without sentiment and without apology. The cold was structural out there, not weather exactly, but a condition of the world, a baseline from which everything else was measured. Ice trolls in the dark beyond the tree line. Clan warriors on the walls with spears ready before he was close enough to be identified. A gate that opened only because his face was known, and only far enough to let him pass. And no, ice trade, farther. He had been here before. The village had not changed. That surprised him, in the way that stability always surprised him. He had seen enough of Runeterra's history to know that most things changed faster than they should. And what remained the same was usually either very well protected or very lucky. This village was neither. It had a world rune, which was the closest thing to a death sentence that the world could issue to a community of 92 people, and it had survived this long on. A combination of geographic obscurity and the particular determination of people who had Qibla Shahlo decided to hold what was theirs regardless of the cost. He found Yago at the altar. The old ice wizard turned when he heard footsteps, and for a moment there was only the map. Calculation in his eyes, the assessment of a man who had survived a long time in a dangerous place by accurately reading what walked through his door. Then recognition arrived. Then warmth. And the hug that followed was the kind of hug that happens between people who have survived things together and did not know, until this moment, how much they had missed each other. They ate, they talked. An hour of exactly the thing Ryze almost never allowed himself anymore. Being a person rather than a function. Telling old stories. Laughing at things that had happened decades ago and were still funny. He had so few people he could do this with. He had been losing them steadily for years, the way you lose things when you live too long and ask too much of the bog. People around you and everyone you still had was precious in a way he could not let himself think about too directly. He thought, briefly, I could stay here 2 weeks, just this. He remembered why he couldn't. He chose his words carefully when the time came. He had prepared them the way he prepared everything, with attention to what would land and what would harden. He told Yago about Shurima, about the clan that had gone from poverty to kingdom-sized territory in a single night, the way empires accelerate when something that should not exist in human hands suddenly does, about what he had found when he investigated, about what happened next. He lowered his voice when he got to the ending. He always lowered his voice for the endings. Yago's face changed the moment he understood where the conversation was going. The warmth did not leave exactly. It was more that something beneath the warmth shifted, the way ice shifts before it breaks. The man who had hugged him like a lost brother a few minutes ago became, very quickly, a man who understood that his friend had come here with a purpose. He was not wrong to change. The argument that followed was the kind that Ryze had lost count of having. Not because the lost two people on the other side were wrong. They were never wrong. Not exactly. 92 people, 3 pregnant women. Winter outside. The rune was the only thing keeping the trolls back, which meant taking it was condemning them to something close to extinction. Yago was not misreading the situation. He was describing it accurately. Ryze described the other situation. How many people on Earth, he asked. He did not ask it coldly. He asked it with the full weight of Loba. What the answer meant to him too, because he already knew it, had known it for years, had been living with the knowledge of it for long enough that it had become part of the architecture, of how he moved through the world. How many of them? Against how many of you? And what happens to all of them if the dark forces gathering beyond this village reach a world rune before I do? Yago went quiet. Then he said, you're going to use it for yourself. This is the moment in every version of this conversation where something breaks. Not because the accusation is true. It isn't. And part of Ryze understands why it is being made anyway. It breaks because the accusation reveals something real. That the world rune has already been Clisser working on Yago. That the amplification has already begun. That the man in front of him is no longer entirely the man he had dinner with an hour ago. Ryze saw it happen in real time. The face of his friend, the face he had looked for across that room, and been genuinely relieved to find, shifting into something else, not disappearing, displaced, covered over by a hunger the rune had been feeding for however long Yago had been close to it. Not a new hunger, not something foreign, but his own hunger enlarged until it had become everything. He tried to explain. That he had learned, slowly and at great cost, not to use the runes. That using wisdom always extracted a price. That he knew from experience, from what he had watched it do to poor others, from what he had briefly felt it beginning to do to him before he understood what was Brock of Kamian happening. The man in front of him was not in a condition to hear it. The first strike came without warning. Ryze hit the floor hard and lay there for a moment tasting blood and processing what had just happened. That the man who had laughed with him an hour ago, who had fed him, who had been glad to see him, had just used the kind of power that no mortal should have direct access to. The rune was not in his hands. It was in his vicinity, and it Ponkon had been long enough that the distinction barely mattered anymore. He contained him first, bought himself time to stand. Then they were circling each other in the subsagalad, way that people circle each other when the conversation has moved past words and both of them know it. And what followed was not a battle in any clean sense but a devastation, power against power in an enclosed space, walls cracking, the ice dome collapsing under the weight of what two experienced wizards could produce when they stopped holding anything back. Ryze was better, he had always been better, that had never been the point. He pulled himself from the wreckage first. He saw Yago reaching for the box in the debris. He saw the look in the old man's eyes. Not malice exactly, but the specific blankness of a consciousness that has been reorganized entirely around one object. And he understood that if the box opened, there would be no more choices to make. There would only be consequences. He crossed the distance without thinking. His hands found the robe. He pulled. He felt the resistance. He felt the specific, awful sensation of knowing exactly what he was doing, and doing it anyway. He felt Yago fight back with everything he had left, which was less with each second. He felt the moment when it was finished. He stood over his friend for a long time. Long enough that the sounds of the collapsing structure became the only sound in the world. Long enough that he had processed everything he was going to process in this place, and understood that the rest of it would have to be carried forward, added to what he already carried, folded into the weight he had been accumulating for decades. The box opened easily. The key was on a cord around Yago's neck. The same cord, he noticed, that had always been there in every memory he had of this man. The rune pulsed orange when he lifted it, like something breathing, like something alive in the core Chirao, specific way that only the most dangerous things in the world are alive, not with warmth, but with potential, with the terrible patience of a thing that has been waiting a very long time, and is thus in no hurry now. He wrapped it in the cloth. He put it away. He did not let himself stay in the ruins any longer than it took to get his legs under him. The village was waiting when he came out, not with weapons, with silence, which was worse. 92 people arranged in the specific posture of communities that have just watched everything they were organized around come apart, looking at the man who had caused it with the eyes of people who know they are already 92 people dead and are simply waiting for the confirmation. The grandmother. The child. 5 years old, maybe, the age where curiosity has not yet learned to be afraid of things that should be frightening. He had noticed the boy on the way in. The boy asked if he could come. Somewhere very deep in the part of Ryze that had not been burned away by decades of necessary choices, something answered that question immediately and clearly. Yes. Take them. Protect them. Forget the rest of it. Just this once. He had heard that voice before. He had listened to it before. He knew what listening to it cost. He told them to leave. He told them where the danger was and in which direction safety lay. He gave them what he could give them, which was information, which was the best he had to offer. He walked into the snow. He did not look back. Not because he was cold or because he did not care, but because the faces behind him were the faces of people who might not survive the winter, and he could not carry those faces and also do what came next. He had learned, through long practice, exactly how much he could carry. The rune in his pack, the knowledge of where the others were, the memory of every friend who had become, in the end, another cost. He walked. The cold took him in the way. The cold takes everything in Freljord, without comment, without ceremony, as a simple fact of the world he had chosen to keep protecting. He did not stop. He had never been able to stop. If this story reached you, subscribe. Every week, the full lore of a League of Legends champion, told the way it was meant to be heard.